20s, the roaring 20s. And could you ever roar? I'm going to tell you why. That decade started out with a great roar, and it was a great euphoria or a sense of jubilation because the world had just gone through a great war, and it was supposed to be the end of all wars. It was the era of jubilation, roaring, but the roaring fizzled out towards the end. But during those years, the 20s and the early 30s, we had what they call prohibition. No liquor was allowed, it was against the law. But behind doors was the bootleggers and the speakeasies, not easy speak, but speakeasies, where you could buy the illegal liquor. And it was the start of some of the criminal gangs in the United States. You may have heard of Al Capone, who was finally caught. The whole thing came to a head and he was caught. And it was a time with no TVs, absolutely none. And they didn't come in until way in the 50s, where I came from. There were few roads. Where you were sitting was a farmer's field. And there were great inventions that came about in the 1920s. One of them was the radio, where people could listen only to what was going on around them and in the world, that they were lucky. And you had insulin founded by Dr. Banting of Canada, which helped to diabetics to live longer, which was a great invention. And there were very few roads. Where Bob was, he said roads weren't built yet up there. Now, and the most dramatic happening, I'm going to really concentrate on this because this is what I think Bob and I have inherited something from. The most dramatic happening was the 1929 stock market crash and the Great Depression that followed. Overnight, there were terrible fortunes were lost in a split second, almost overnight. Suicide was prevalent, and Siefert bread lines were the normal thing. And my godmother sold donuts on the streets of Boston to survive. Bob and I have a legacy from these years in particular. Bob, from having lived through it, and me through my grandmother. Bob, you were able to really roar even at the worst of times because your people have the great foresight to take you out of the cradle and into the gold mines of South Porcupine. Now, can you think of a better place to be? In the time of the Great Depression, gold went from 10 cents an ounce to $7 an ounce. And gold, the beginning of those gold fields was where to be. You had a job when the Depression people, most of them were starving. That's why I think you're a lucky dude, one reason. And now my family, and also now another point, you came out of those Depression years not long after with a university degree in mechanical engineering, is that right? From the McGill University, the top-notch university of all of Canada and known in the world. And you were an honor student, the creme de la creme of knowledge, and where you went just after the Depression years, you're a lucky dude, Bob. My family did not fare as well, being in the rural area of Quebec. But out of every hardship, there is much to be learned. My father was taken out of school in grade 6 and had to work on the farm, and he had to work for the neighbors who had a bigger farm to earn extra money, maybe 50 cents a day, to keep the taxes on the farm. But we made up for it, his children and grandchildren, and he had to be taken out of school at grade 6 to run the farm. But he was a very brilliant man. Keep that in mind. His family more than made up for it. His children and grandchildren are all very well educated, and most of them having done it themselves. Now, I'm very, very proud of my mother and grandmother, who were both orphans in the 1920s. A very, very difficult time to be an orphan. I'm proud of them because they worked their fingers to the bone, looking after children and doing housework to survive. They made an honorable, respectful life for themselves. And my mother taught me deep compassion for the disabled. And my grandmother, who was orphaned at the age of 8, taught me survival skills. I spent much time with her. She lived in the mountains of Quebec in the wilderness, where this self-sufficiency was the name of the game, because she was miles from anywhere. And I'll give you an example of the survival technique that I learned from my grandmother, and then I'll say something about you, Bob. Now, at a time, this is an example that I learned from my grandmother many, many years ago. At a time when my husband was critically ill, my car was 10 years old and falling apart, a power of attorney document was questioned and all our income stopped. I was out job hunting. My daughter came up to me and asked if she could make her graduation dress. And I was thrilled. I congratulated her for thinking to save her mother some money. So with my guidance, we set about the task. I had taken sewing lessons I wanted to be a perfect mother. And here is the dress that my daughter made with my supervision. And I would like you to take note of those beautiful handmade buttonholes and the covered buttons. Well, I couldn't do that. I had taken lessons, but I didn't know how to do that. But I had a friend who was a superb dressmaker. So I went to the phone, called her up and said, I got a deal, Connie. If you make those buttonholes and those buttons, I'll do your taxes, because I had taken accounting and taxation. I was pretty good at it. So the deal was made, and the dress was made. Beautifully handmade buttons. And I'm still doing the taxes, and you know how I get paid. I get the loveliest jams because she won't do it for nothing. So she supplies me in jam because I like peanut butter and jam on toast in the morning. So that theory of survival, you can't beat it. It's doing what you can, being self-sufficient, and if you can't do it, you barter and trade. Here you are, Lindsay. Thank you very much. Now, Bob, you have inherited a very special gift. And that gift, I think, now I don't know where you got it, could be your Anglo-Saxon blood, because you go back to the 13th century in England, and you've got the same blood I have, an Anglo-Saxon determination and everything. So it could be in your genes, it could be just a gift from your ancestors. You do have a bit of royal blood, too. Anyway, I understand that you and your daughter have a health food store in Georgetown, right?
Right.
Well, ladies and gentlemen.
She is the one who has the store. I work for her.
You work for her. Oh, that's a combination as far as I'm concerned. That's a good combination. Ladies and gentlemen, can you think of anything better to do in this age than to have a health food store in a prime location of Georgetown, and where health foods are on the go all the time? Everybody's talking about them. Everybody wants to eat healthy foods. I think your family knows exactly what to do at the right time. And you know, your daughter knows, and your mother and father know. That is the gift you have, I think, from the hard years. Bob, you've earned the right to roar. And I feel like I could do a little bit of roaring too. We both survived. Happy birthday.